reload the discussion, but by the looks of it, we need to spend more money on parking in town than maybe we need to spend on this. There's only just a couple of meetings in the fire department having something going on, and I don't even know if I'd like to use a one lane. We expect Todd to make it.
I didn't hear that he was.
He said he might be a little late.
Good to see you. Have a good day.
We're getting sick. There's some virus out there.
Isn't that the second time that's happened?
Yeah, anytime we go out there, we get sick. It's Oregon. It's a drinking water or something.
Supposed to be drinking beer, I guess.
That's probably good.
All right. I apologize for my tardiness. The fellow that lives the closest is normally the last one to arrive, so that seems to be the rule. So this is a Select Board and Finance Committee meeting in Ashfield, yes.
And a Technology Committee meeting.
And
I'll
technology.
need to call that meeting to order.
You even have a quorum?
Amazing.
Amazing but true. On Wednesday, February 18th, we'll call the meeting to order on our end at 6:06. So, Tom Kohler and I are here. We're waiting for Todd. We expect him to arrive momentarily. So there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Any other recording devices? Ted, do you have one over there?
Yeah, we do now.
Okay, so there's 5 audio recording devices and 1 video recording device. So, while we're waiting for Todd, I hate to, we can,
Well, let me just say that I'm gonna call the Technology Committee meeting to order at 6:07. We've got Brian and Andy and myself. We will not probably adjourn at the end of this meeting, but hope to continue afterwards. And anybody's welcome to join us.
Finance Committee, are you expecting a quorum tonight?
We're expecting a quorum, and at that moment I will convene us. Well, convene us, I can't do it.
You can't do it, you don't have?
No, I have not.
So you're just innocent bystanders that may get acknowledged from time to time?
May, time to time.
All right, we got some meetings, minutes to go over, while we're waiting for Todd.
It
Yeah,
sounded like you could be a little bit more than a little bit. He was coming back from Boston at around 3:30, so.
Well, why don't we want to set the minutes aside then?
We can, well, you can't do the 1/7 minutes because I wasn't going to that. So we can save that for the end.
Very well, we leave those, we can come back to them. We know Joe and Jim both have a trip to get home, so.
Well, I'm only coming.
You're only Covington, that's right. And somehow I was thinking you were New Salem, because that's the last place I had seen you.
That's where I was Monday. We were both there Monday night, so I got there Monday night.
And I'm staying local.
Are you?
Yeah. We have meetings tomorrow night as well.
You could feel free to stay at my house if I had any running water. Hopefully I will by the time I get back. All right, so Joe, you want to talk to us about where are we on this financing? It seems to me that we were expecting some numbers on
Yeah. Yeah. If it's all right, I'll just sit here.
Yes.
It's okay.
Just speak loud enough. You're competing with something back here, the dragon, which is very loud.
My name is Joe Markarian. I'm with FRCOG. I am working with the team of the MBI Wire West team to get information to communities on different aspects of this project. And my area is focused on financing. And Jim and I have been with the towns, and my intent has been to help towns understand what their options are to finance this project, what the general costs are, and how it might look as this plays out, and financing it plays out for the next 5, 6 years, and you got to look at beyond that as well. I'm going to put up a screen that shows what this town's estimated contribution to the project is. Jim will talk more specifically about how those numbers were arrived at and where they go from here. I will say this about this project. I've been involved with a fair number of municipal construction projects, and I suspect that you folks have had your share of experience as well. And I would encourage you to view this as any other construction project that the town might be engaged in. And I say that from the perspective of zeroing in on what the cost is. We all know that when a number is passed by town meeting, it's usually based on an estimate, based on specific drawings of a building that's looking to be constructed. You really don't know what it's going to cost until the bids come in. And hopefully the bids come in lower than that estimate, and sometimes they come in higher. And ultimately, you don't know what the project costs until it's over, and hopefully there's no change orders that cause cost increases, and there's no labor issues or material spikes or unforeseen circumstances that cause costs to rise. So this is no different than that. I think that Wire West has done a good job in presenting a number that is firm to go to town meeting with. And what I've started to encourage towns to do is that there will be more refinements in that number, and Jim will explain where those refinements will come from. But I would say that the number is reliable, and that if there's any alteration in that number, it's likely to be to your benefit. That I would wait till town meeting to make the change. I wouldn't try and re-engineer your appeal and your marketing, so to speak, to your neighbors and residents. Stay steady with a number until you get to town meeting, and if there's a difference, then it can be discussed on town meeting floor, and the change can be made. As Jim will point out, it's likely that a reduction will take place at that time. So, with that in mind, let me see if I can get this back up again. I'm sorry.
That's our hand up.
It doesn't want to.
Can we either get closer to that, or do you have paper copies of this, maybe we can follow through?
Yep, I have paper copies. Yeah, thanks for asking. The number at the top is estimated to be the gross cost to the town. And that number is actually from an earlier number, which I think was over $4 million. And so that process of refining the cost is already underway. Jim will explain more, but that cost is primarily driven by the number of premises in your town that are likely to receive service, and the number of fiber miles it'll take to reach those premises, plus the fiber that would go from where that fiber runs down the street, up the driveway to the house, and everything that goes along with that. So that's a total cost to provide service directly to the homes of every premise, as has been counted to this point in your town. That number is offset by the town's share of the $40 million that the state is kicking into the pot. And that is broken down as well into an $18 million portion and a $22 million portion, each of which has there's a little wrinkle in how those are allocated, and Jim will explain those and how those came about and where it's going from here. So the net cost to the town is, at this point, appears to be $2.3 million to service every resident in the town. So
add service to every restaurant.
service to every resident, as if every person who lived here wanted service. That's not likely to happen, of course. So that's one of the variables that's going to bring that cost down. But that's not known until a little bit later in the game. So looking at
So this $3,710,000, that is an updated number in the last 3 or 4 months?
that number was published internally on December 15th. So it was
About
after.
the time we were having.
Yeah, it was right after, as a matter of fact, it was right after we had the forums. So the forum number looks different than this number, because they're just that refinement process. And that's what the consultants have been doing.
The numbers you shared with us after the forum that were correctly released to the forum, are these the same numbers or have been corrected again?
I don't know.
I can tell you what, you're asking what the original number was?
4.7 million?
I had it at, I looked it up, yeah, 4.7 million.
And by the Wire West Board Directors meeting, the corrections that they made, you sent us a bit of or something.
Yeah, I encourage you
Never
just,
done.
just to focus on this because these are the numbers that they've settled on. And there were some issues with some errors and some presentations, and there was also a range of estimates at an earlier time. And now, if I can speak for you guys, they've settled on these numbers, and this is the best estimate at this point.
So in Ashfield, as well as other communities who will be involved in this project, $2.3 million of the cost is a lot. It's not something that you're going to have available cash to pay, nor is that probably a wise thing to do if you did it. And in all likelihood, you're going to be looking at the prospects of borrowing money to finance this project and paying debt service over the course of time on that borrowing. That borrowing can be less than that $2.3 million if you have resources to devote to it. And I can show you on another spreadsheet what the impact of that might be on a tax burden. Under the laws of Massachusetts, communities are entitled to issue notes, which are for a term of less than 1 year. The benefit of issuing a note is that you're obligated to pay interest only. If you have a 1-year note, at the end of 12 months, you pay only interest, and the interest rates on notes are less than 0.5% right now. The interest rates on a bond, if you were to go right into something like a mortgage, a 20-year mortgage, the interest rates are 4%. So this is a significant advantage to doing that. In most instances, when communities have building projects, they will issue notes through the course of engineering and construction, substantial completion and punch list until they open the doors. And once the doors are open and they're occupied, they'll stop issuing notes each year and they'll roll what they owe now into a bond from that point moving forward. That same tact can be applied here. The state allows you to issue notes paying less than that interest only for 2 years. It allows you to, for the next 3 years, to pay that same low interest rate, but it requires you to contribute something toward principal. It's not a gigantic number, but it's more than interest only. It's less than what you would if you fully bonded this and the amortization schedule started. So I'm going to show you what those are. But before I do that, I also want to point out that I expect that part of the decision making here will be not only what the annual debt service is and making a decision on what people can tolerate as a payment, but also what's the cost of this project over the course of the entire borrowing period. From day one to the time that bond is paid for, you're paying interest. And you have the opportunity to use different variations of that 2 years, 3 years, and then bond. You could bond right from the start. You could bond in year 3. You could bond at any time. So what I've done is I've done a chart. It's on the first page of what you're looking at, and it shows what the total cost would be over over the course of these terms, the course of the term for this project. And you can see in the right-hand column the relative costs. Now, borrowing for this kind of project, the state allows you to borrow for 20 years for this purpose, we say it that way. There is also a board called the Municipal Finance Oversight Board. It's a state board made up of the treasurer, the comptroller, and the DOR, Director of Accounts. Communities can go to that board and request a longer bonding period, up to 30 years. The benefit of that, of course, is that if you've got a 30-year bond, your annual amortization payment is going to be less. The disadvantage is that you're paying for more years, so ultimately what you're paying toward the project is going to be more. And as I keep pointing out to people, there's also the public policy issue of, is it a good idea for a town to be under a bond for 30 years? You know, that's a public policy thing, and I think people generally have a gut feel. There's no rule of thumb on that, but you usually have a gut feeling about whether that's a good thing or not. So this is one of the considerations that I suspect you'll be looking at. It could be a few $100,000. Maybe that's significant. Maybe it's not significant. So with that in mind, I took the scenario that costs the least amount over the long term, that scenario where you're issuing notes for each year, and it's a separate decision each year. At the end of a term of a note, you make a decision again. Do we want to float another note, or do we want to do something else? Do we want to float a 6-month note, a 12-month note, whatever? These decisions are made, generally they're made by a treasurer, believe it or not, but not in isolation. There's discussions with, with the chair of the finance committee, the chair of the board of selectmen, perhaps. But there's a financial advisor who's a professional person. There are institutions out there. We have a financial advisor who's on board with this project from First Southwest, but Unity Bank has financial advisors. Cape Cod Savings Bank has financial advisors. Eastern Bank has. So there are financial advisors out there. Treasurers have them, and those people will sit down with your treasurer and talk through all the ramifications of the bonding options that are out there in the market. Keeping in mind that a bond is something that people invest in like they would anything else. They're putting some faith in the town to pay back that bond. It's a part of their investment portfolio. So the financial advisor takes that bond or that paper to the market and finds buyers. But that's something that's down the road a little bit. It involves your treasurer, and the specific options there are discussed at that time. Yeah.
You want me to take questions as you go, or do you want us to hold questions?
Oh, questions whenever you got it.
That financial advisor, is that tantamount to the bond counsel?
No, they're two different people. They both cost money, and typically what happens is the cost for their services is rolled into the bond and paid off over the term of the bond. So it's not a direct dollar outlay that you've got to appropriate for in a separate line item. Yeah.
Under the interest-only scenario, I'm used to the concept of building a building. In the private sector, you might have bridge loans, and then you roll everything up into a note, and you push it over 20 years or something like that. Are you paying interest only on what you use?
Yes. Just now and we should talk a little bit about on bonding. This is a town meeting kind of thing, and it's, I'll talk about it right now. If you were to move forward with this project and you decide that you want to, that you're going to have to borrow this money, an article has to be placed before town meeting, a bond authorization article. That authorizes the treasurer to issue bonds. Bonds don't get passed along unless the Board of Selectmen. The Board of Selectmen's signatures have to be on bonds. So it's a treasurer, Board of Selectmen. So town meeting needs to approve that bond authorization by 2/3 vote. Now, if you had the resources to pay the debt service,
That's much like an override, that it would be 2/3 on the floor and a ballot.
that's what I'm getting to.
Okay.
You have to separate you have to separate the bond authorization, which generates the greenbacks, you know, to pay for the bricks and the mortar and so forth. You've got that money, it's being spent, but you've got this mortgage, essentially, this loan that you need to pay back. That's the question. Where does the money come from to pay the debt service on that borrowing? Now, if you are a really affluent community, you might have resources from within your budget because you have huge free cash, or you just generate a lot of revenue every year, so you could absorb that cost in your budget, no tax impact. Most towns can't do that. Most towns are in the position where they have to go back to the voters and ask the voters if the town can be permitted to raise additional tax dollars sufficient enough to cover that debt service. It's a debt exclusion. It's distinguished from an override. Okay? An override is something that's permanent, stays on forever, and increases 2.5% every year along with your tax levy. A debt exclusion is the amount of money that you raise is determined by the debt schedule that's produced, which is tied to the interest rate and the term in the principal on the loan. That raising that additional money ends when the term of the loan ends, so and taxes come down. So,
Or in our case, we habitually roll it into the next project, we have to borrow some money.
you can get another debt exclusion. Debt exclusion money disappears once the bond term ends. It's not like other debt that's inside your budget where you can backfill. So, yeah, but that's my first. Because the theory is that if you take money away from debt service, it goes somewhere else and you'll never get it back into debt service. So a debt exclusion, you have that bond authorization that town meeting needs to approve by 2/3 vote. Typically, a debt exclusion is tied to that bond authorization language. It's a phrase, a clause that's put on that says that the bond authorization is only effective if the debt exclusion passes. So if the debt exclusion doesn't pass a town-wide vote, then you're at square one again. Okay? It is lawful not to put the debt exclusion on there and to come back later after you've bonded and started incurring debt and so forth and seek a debt exclusion from a future point forward. But that's risky. Because if the town decides it doesn't want to pay and pick up that payment, then you've borrowed money, you've got to pay it back. The debt service has to come from somewhere else. So we're encouraging towns to put forward an article, a bond authorization article with a debt exclusion. The article is contingent on the passage of a debt exclusion, and as the safest way to go. Merely getting back to the question, merely because the money is authorized doesn't mean it's actually raised and spent. And that's what I'm going to get into right now. I took that 2-year, 3-year, and in year 6 bond scenario, and I applied it down to your cost. It's on the second page, and we've also made it's not an assumption. I mean, Jim will talk more about this, but once the project starts and you're involved in the project, it's not likely that the project's going to require your entire $2.3 million upfront. It's more likely that it's going to require just a portion of that. It might be as low as 10%. I've estimated 25%, just for the sake of moving this forward. In year 2, they may want some more money. I've said, okay, let's assume that they want half of what each town's cost is in year 2, and then in year 3, the town would be obligated to present all of that money. So the borrowing would be staggered, so the cost of the borrowing would also be staggered and would incrementally increase. So here, of your $2.3 million, 25% of that in year 1, which might not be for a couple of years, is $575,000 at 0.75% interest, which is higher than the current rates of 0.4%. that's $4,300 a year. After 12 months, that's what you would be into this project for a year, and your cost would be $4,300. In year 2, you'd be you're 2 years into the project, pretty close to near completion for your town, and your obligation would be an additional $8,600 because you're only paying that nominal interest on what you're borrowing. In year 3, you borrowed your whole $2.3 million. This is where partial payment of principal comes in. And although this is not precise, it's an estimate of what that principal payment would be in each of the next 3 years. And then in year 6, you roll into a bond. And as you can see from the bold numbers at the bottom, once you start paying partial principal, the numbers get bigger. And once you're into bonding, that's $180,000 a year. So that's what you'd have to come up with to pay the debt service on a 15-year bond. I mentioned earlier this is a 20-year bond limit on borrowing for this purpose. It's 20 years, which is the combination of note years and bond years. So if you issued notes only for 2 years, you could bond for 18. If you issued notes for 3, 17. And if you wanted to go 30 years, then your notes, you could go up to 5 years, that sort of thing. If you did notes for 5 years, you can only do 25. So that's what the numbers are. These are approximations. They're as precise as. My point here is to show you the order of magnitude of these numbers, so you have a sense of where they're going to be. And I don't think they'll be far off, but these are not precise numbers because you don't know what the rates are going to be. You may do some things to reduce your borrowing. So, what kind of tax impact does that have?
Before you get into that, Joe, before you permanently read page 1, these numbers are significantly different from what was at the forum and the interest that Ashfield shared the $40 million grant. It was up substantially. That's good news, certainly. My question is, how secure is that grant? The $40 million grant. From what we know, we've got a new governor who's an A&F person who is communicating with the MBI folks and the Wire West folks, has indicated that they support the project.
They had a press release today.
Oh, did they? Good.
Jointly by the governor, the lieutenant governor, Stan Rosenberg, Kulik, and Ben Downing, saying they fully support the project. The $50 million will be laid on the table. They're in full support of the project and want to see it move forward. So
good.
When will commitment? What is the point of commitment, and when will that arrive?
I would say that the press release is the point of commitment. The schedule that was agreed to with the last governor, and we've got indications that the new governor has also agreed to that schedule, is that $10 million will be released immediately. $15 million will be released in July of this year, and $15 million will be released in July of next year.
My second and last question at this point is on the projects requiring, or on the bonds requiring FOB approval. All of these would have a repayment scheme that would require overlaid intercepts. Am I correct or not?
Not necessarily. This is, again, something that a financial advisor, what you're talking will be involved in. What you're talking about is the state qualified bond program.
Mm-hmm.
It's also the state house note programs. And these programs are designed for smaller towns that don't have bond ratings, for smaller amounts of borrowings. These programs have reduced amounts of disclosure. Disclosure is incredibly expensive to produce by professionals when you do these things. So the disclosures and the fees are all reduced. In the case of the State House Notes program, it's just a matter of filling out forms correctly, and you qualify, and up to $1 million, and you get the benefit of the state, these notes. The state qualified bond program requires an application to the Municipal Finance Oversight Board, which I mentioned earlier. And they notify the Department of Revenue, which does a coverage analysis for the town. It looks at a various number of factors, but in particular, they're looking at your state aid, because in the state qualified bond program, you are getting the benefit of the state's credit rating. You're riding into the market on their coattails. It's an attractive purchase for buyers, bond buyers, because the program requires the state to take the debt service payment off the top of your state aid.
Is there a difference in rate for the bond, or, we would apply under the state's approved credit?
If you were to go on your own,
a difference in interest or not?
if you were to go on your own, you mean, as opposed to, or not the state qualified bond program, I don't think you guys have a bond rating.
No.
Yeah, so it costs money to get a bond rating, okay, $4,000, to get a bond rating, and you don't have any borrowing history. You're a risk of sense because you don't have that history. You're not going to get the benefit of a lower rate in that regard. They're looking at your ability to repay the bond. That's what they're looking at. So they're going to be looking at your tax base. They're going to be looking at your management structure, your commercial base. These are the rating agencies. The higher your rate, the lower your interest rate in the market. But it's hard to say that the town is going to rate well because it has no history, and you're small. So it really will turn out to your advantage to go the qualified bond route.
Do you think it will?
Without looking at it,
Just generically?
yeah.
Even though our payments would consume the vast majority of our local aid?
Well, I was just going to look. I didn't have a copy of what
It's
you had
about,
there, so.
we have 250,000 for
Yeah. Well, keep in mind when state aid comes in. Well, let me backtrack. If you go out to bond, whether it's with notes or bonds, you're going to add a line item to your budget. One line item is going to be short-term interest. That's for the notes. Another 2 line items are going to be long-term principal, long-term interest. And so it's going to be appropriated in the line item budget like anything else. When state aid comes in, it goes into the general fund. It mixes up with all your other general fund revenue from local receipts and everything. So the fact that the state's taking that money off the top isn't going to affect your budget because it's also taking the expense out of the budget as well. So that's not the issue. If you have a debt exclusion for the same amount, the debt exclusion is putting that money back in.
And what I've been told, I don't know for sure, but what I've been told is that the state's current bond rating is AA+.
Yeah, it's pretty good actually.
And the qualified bonds are currently 1 point below the state's rating, so they'd be AA. It would be hard to see an individual town getting anything better than that for a bond.
But when it all sugar's down, it costs.
Yeah.
Maybe Jim is going to attend to these particular points, but before we get too far away from page 1, I'm particularly interested in the total obligation up at the top, $3.7 million, because that's now the third figure that I'm aware of that reflects costs. And the last figures have come with different descriptors, which caused me a little confusion. For example, back on December 10th, the presentation made for Ashfield, the cost listed was $4.7 million for this installation. And that I understood to be, it did not include state contribution. It was 4.7. Subsequently, we were given something that apparently Wire West discussed over a weekend in early January, and this was a figure of $3.063 million. And this was post-grant and OPM cost. I don't know what OPM means. And I take it that that's an adjustment for 4.7 down to something that's now roughly 3.1 million. And now, we're talking about a total town obligation of 3.7 million, of which the state's contribution appears to be 1.4 million. And is this now an agreed allocation from MBI based on the 33 towns out of 44 that are eligible? How are those things figured? How do these adjustments take place?
One of the, excuse me, one of the issues that we've been struggling with is that about 21%, more or less, of the total cost of the project is dependent upon the number of premises in the town. That is the cost to splice the fiber, connect it up, run it up to the house, put the electronics on the house, put the electronics in the house. That's about 21% of the total cost. We've had 4 different sources of premise counts in the towns. Credit rating bureaus, my mapping efforts, MBI's mapping efforts, consultants, and we've had 4 different numbers for premises. None of them have agreed. And that's part of why this fluctuation occurs, is we're trying to figure out how many premises we actually have. I've been doing a lot of pushback too on the modeling that the consultants have been doing to point out areas where I think that they've over-assumed or under-assumed in some of their numbers. So they've worked to refine them. We keep working to narrow that down, narrow down what I see as differences. The premise counts, we're issuing maps on Friday. MBI will be measuring, sending out maps to the select board that will be validated so that we get you guys to tell us how many premises are in your town. That will be the official number for the premise count, and beyond, based on that, then we'll recalculate these numbers. But that is a huge driver. The other thing is the state's portion of the money going to the project for each town is also based on the premise counts. The formula for apportionment is based on the number of premises in each town as a percentage of the total, and the number of fiber miles in each town as a percentage of the total, weighted 50-50. So as these premise counts vary, the state's contribution also varies. So that's the reason we're trying to lock down these premise counts. The fiber miles are pretty easy to calculate on the maps to measure. So we don't have any discussion with that, but the number of premise counts are really causing this thing to move around a little bit.
On a related note, what Ted said, at the December forum, 40 million grant, it was reported to us in a way here, MBI currently expects to use 18 million for regional related costs and allocate 22 million to town related construction costs.
Right.
Our 1.41 million is our share of that 22 million, am I correct?
The 22 million and the 18 million.
What is the difference between regional related costs and town related construction costs?
The $18 million, the MBI board and the EPC board have agreed that the best use of their time, energy, and their fiduciary responsibility is to incentivize towns to join the network rather than go out and do it on their own. So the original numbers and the numbers that we're currently presenting have that $18 million spread across all 44 towns. What they have decided to do is to take that 18 million and give it only to those towns that are part of the network. Okay?
Part of the Wire West.
Part of the Wire West network. So the amount of money that we're giving you tonight is less than the amount of money that you will actually get from the state. We haven't worked out the formula for the apportionment.
Well, we're not getting money from the state.
Well,
you are, right?
Right, we're offsetting. The amount you'll have to borrow is less.
So are there different allocation schemes for these two components?
Yes.
Now, I noted in your minutes that there is an allocation scheme from Jim Law that had 3 components.
I had 3 components. I had
Is that
poles.
something that can be shared with us?
Yeah, I had poles, premises, and fiber miles.
And you got the numbers for all of them.
And I got the numbers for all the
And
towns.
that's something you can share with us.
It's something I can share with you. We've had a lot of discussion back and forth over the last 3 months
We're interested in this too.
about this allocation formula, and we've come to the conclusion that while the polls have some significance, it's not a large enough significance to worry about. So we've come to the conclusion that for now, and that we will just use polls and premises. However, the resolution that was put before the MBI board,
Miles.
I'm sorry, miles and premises, the resolution that was the motion that was put before the MBI and NTC board on January 29th left room for that allocation formula to be adjusted over the next couple of months as we get deeper into this thing. So
And is the allocation formula consistent for both parts or different for both parts?
the allocation formula is only for,
The 22 million?
no, it's for both parts, but it's spread across all 44 towns.
Okay.
Okay, so the change will be two changes. One is that we may change that allocation formula from 50-50 polls and premises, unknown yet. The other change is the 18 million, instead of spreading that across 44 towns, will be spread across 32 towns. So that will increase the amount you have to borrow.
Well, does it decide being an opportunity for towns to offer comment on your proposals?
Through David, yes.
Another related question, you mentioned 32 towns. That's the number who will sign this non-binding resolution at the select board level. What's the likelihood of more towns coming closer to the event, including if they're not going to go forward? Or if they don't get past, let's say, an annual meeting, commitment by the citizens to take on the debt, perhaps tax increase, of course, associated with that? Does this mean there's more money for the remaining towns?
That's a huge unknown. This is a big deal for every town. We're asking the town, most of the towns, we're asking them to authorize borrowing larger than they have ever authorized before. This is a big deal. It's going to be a tough road. We are mobilizing everything that we can to help ensure that the citizens understand what's going on and back this at town meeting, but there's no guarantees. If only half the towns approve, what we're saying is for that 18 million, you can come back again in September, October, November, have a special town meeting and try again. You can try again 2, 3, 4 times. But by December 31st, we're cutting that off. All the towns that are in by December 31st will share in that 18 million. All the towns that decide to join after December 31st for the next 2 years will get part of the 22 million.
So if, for example, Leverett will get a part of the 22 million, but not a part of the...
That's correct. That's correct. So towns that can't make up their mind or can't get the thing passed by December 31st of this year will only share in the 22 million. If they can't make up their mind in the next 2 years, then they lose completely, and what's left over goes back into the net.
So the fewer towns that make up their mind between now and the end of the year, the towns that do make up their mind have an opportunity to get reimbursed more
That's
than...
correct. That's correct.
What is your
I mean,
assumption?
some communities could put on a push for telling other communities not to do it.
Jim, what's your assumption on these numbers, or Joe, that how many communities are involved with this? 32?
32.
Is that what you're saying? So you're assuming that they're all going to pass it?
I'm not assuming anything. I'm just doing the best push I can to make sure that happens.
Well, these are all excellent questions and good answers too so far. But I would like to have Joe go through the rest of his presentation. I mean, I'm coming up with about 80 cents on 1,000, which is what the effect of our tax rate would be.
Well, we'll see how that works. Dueling numbers. All right, so
looking at this, down at the bottom, you can see the projected cost to the town. And what I've included up here is I always look at your levy and how much your levy increases each year. And that's primarily to see where you are relative to your levy ceiling, and you guys are not at risk of reaching your levy ceiling. And also, I look at what kind of excess levy capacity that you're generating. As it turns out, this year, you actually generated a fair amount of levy capacity. I mean, you went from like $24,000 or so to $87,000, and that's in the information that you have. There's a chart in there on it's sort of, I think it's page 3. It reflects excess levy capacity, and it shows you what you've generated over the last few years. And some towns do this intentionally, others don't. It's page 3, the bottom chart, and as you can see, the fourth column in says excess levy capacity. And you have historically done what most towns have done, although fewer are doing this, and that is you've taxed almost to the limit of what you're allowed to tax, what you're allowed to raise. And as I say, that's a common practice. But in 2015, are people there? In 2015,
Joe, we have several pages. You come to the transition.
Halfway through.
It's about halfway through.
yeah, I'm sorry.
New page number.
You said something about $87,000 excess levy capacity on the third sheet. Now, how did you go
Oh, no,
there?
page 3. If you look at the of the data,
Not page 3 in the packet.
It's about halfway through.
yeah.
Right, but were you not referring to the $87,000 on the third page of this handout first?
It is on the third page of the handout. Your history is on the third page of the data set. Yeah, I'm sorry. But as you can see from this column here, the fourth column in, historically, you have raised taxes almost to the limit of what you're allowed. But last year or this year, whether a decision was made consciously or whether just the way the numbers work, you've got $87,000 in excess levy capacity. That's tax dollars that could have been raised, but weren't. And as a result of that, your tax rate went down from $16.16 to $15.97. Okay, so yeah, that's good. That's good for the residents. But what that does represent, it represents money. Like each year is a separate decision. So next year you're going to be in a position of making a decision again as to what percentage of your permitted levy you're actually going to raise. And I bring that up because it represents a source of money to pay your obligations. But it is a tax increase. I mean, let's be clear on that. You've had pretty good free cash. You've got stabilization. What I said is that the Department of Revenue, and when I was there, we would always advocate you never use non-recurring money to pay for recurring expenses. Stabilization is a non-recurring revenue source. But I can view those first 4 years as essentially fixed costs. Each year is independent. Once you hit the 6th year or whenever you choose to bond, then that obligation becomes a recurring cost in my mind. So I could justify in my mind using stabilization to cover some of the debt service in those years, or using free cash to do that, or using excess levy capacity to do that. If you were to, see right here, now I just rolled up the impacts, and we're right on the money, 80 cents. In that 6th year, that bond would be 80 cents on the tax rate.
Neither one of us look like it, but we've been doing this a long time.
See, that is something to be proud of. So what I took was that 80 cents on the tax rate reflects $190 on the average single-family tax, which is, let's see, the average single-family assessed value is $237. So a home that's valued at $237,000 would pay the amounts as you see going across that impact line. If you were to put the $4,300 and take that out of excess levy capacity, it would raise the average homeowner's bill by $5 in 1 year. If you were to take the $8,600 out of excess levy capacity, it would be $10 more for that average resident.
Well, of course, you're presupposing we have no plans of that excess capacity.
I'm presupposing that the fact that you created it, that you don't need it. But then the numbers get a little bit bigger, and I put the per month in here just as that'll be significant when Jim starts talking about comparing what you're paying now for service and what the rates for future service under the project would be. So the question becomes, if you were to generate money from somewhere else in year one, then you could be 1 year into this project and have no tax impact for your residents. If you can do the same in year two and come up with $8,600, not from excess levy capacity, then again, you would be 2 years into this project and there would be no tax impact. And after 2 years, the project is near completion in the town. And so people, maybe in year 3, certainly in year 4, would be having service, getting service. So the question becomes, in years 3, 4, and 5 in particular, compared to year 6, if you had $100,000, are you better off using that $100,000 to again offset the tax impact so that 100,000? Yeah. If you do that, then you can minimize again the impact. And you can do that in each one of the next 2 years if you feel you have the resources to do that. Now the question becomes, do you do that or do you stockpile money? Do you take that $300,000, let's say by year 4 it's $400,000, and you take it off the top of what you borrow. And when you take it off the top of what you borrow, you're affecting the tax impact not only in the year you take it off, but for 15 years out. So that's what you're looking at. And the impact would go from $190 a year for that average homeowner to $152 a year for that average homeowner. Is that significant enough to do? That's a local decision. One of the other considerations here is, and Jim will talk about this, is the notion that the operations might throw off excess revenue. And that excess revenue, that it's in the mind of a lot of people that should come back to the towns to pay their debt service. There are some towns that are thinking in terms of, if we can hold our homeowners harmless in terms of covering that debt service payment in each of the first 4 years, maybe by year 5, 6, and 7, revenue starts coming in and the impact is again minimal on them over the long term. I will say that if revenue comes in, excess revenue comes in, it won't be until year probably 6. If it comes in, it's going to be a local receipt, so you can't use it the year it comes in. It's going to have to flow to free cash for the next year. If you want to get it on the recap to cover the debt service here, so that so the debt service doesn't get taxes, you're going to have to get your free cash certified and have a town meeting before the recap is submitted in the fall, November, December. If those ducks don't fall in order, then that money can certainly be used at a special town meeting or at the annual town meeting for the next year's debt service to cover it.
Or whatever project we come up with in the meantime.
Yeah.
Past this. This probably will be the last capital project the town of Ashfield will ever have.
Yeah, you're probably not alone with that. So that's a decision to make as to whether we want to expend money along the way to reduce tax impacts? Or do we want to, I can do it this way. Or do you want to stockpile money in a stabilization fund and then use it to offset borrowing in year 6?
The strategy might call for take off right now, start preparing for year 6 by investing, moving your stabilization up to help offset the impact of the transition from your notes and PP into full payments.
Yeah, I definitely look at how you, I haven't looked at how you use your free cash and whether you spend it all or not. But that's definitely something to look at. This might be an opportunity to sort of wean yourself off of free cash if you use a lot of it. A lot of towns will get their free cash certified in the fall, and they'll use it to backfill budgets that were approved the prior spring. That's not optimal. I don't know if that happens here, but it makes much more sense to, when your free cash is, well, first of all, it makes much more sense to require departments to give you a budget number in the spring that they know they have to live with for the entire fiscal year, that they should have no expectation of coming back for more money. That's the first thing. Then when your free cash is certified in the fall, if you don't spend it at a fall town meeting, it is actually a reserve that you have for the whole year, because once you spend it, it's not a reserve anymore. It's gone.
Well, that's exactly what we've been doing, is that we do use free cash if we have it available come town meeting time to fill anything that we, when we're doing a budget so far in advance,
Agreed, yeah.
A year or better than a year, we do kind of suck free cash down. I mean, a huge note, we've got $383,000 worth of free cash, which in my mind, historically for Ashfield, is a fantastic number. I'm amazed that it's there. But by the end of March, I believe that number will be more like $250,000 by the time we get done paying for winter roads.
Yeah. And if that $250,000 is unexpended, then it is contributing toward your number the next year. So most of it, my town, our town manager, town administrator, was very effective of essentially, we did the same thing. We did just in probably numbers 4 times the size. And he, year after year after year, managed to sort of cut back the reliance on free cash in the fall. I mean, it's hard on department heads. I mean, they have expenses they don't expect. They also have things they need and they put off and so forth. We all know that. But if somehow you can make the shift so that what they're giving you in the spring reflects what they need, and they believe they're getting it as well, then it's a much better situation when you have that free cash. Because with that free cash, then you can use it for the budget. I mean, if you have free cash available in the spring, you can use it as a revenue source for the budget that you're approving in the spring, and you use it next year. So the department's going to get it anyways. It's just a matter of making this shift.
That's exactly how we do it. Is that we're not backfilling holes in the budget.
Okay.
We're using it up front as a revenue source.
Yeah.
95% of the time. I mean, sometimes things come up.
Well, that's good. That's a sound practice.
Winter roads are hard to do.
What about revenue?
I predict they're going to be expensive this year.
I'd like to understand revenue a little bit, the potential revenue from this, and you say Holly gets 10% subscription or 40%, and we get 75%. Is there more in it for the town that has a better subscription rate than
I will get into that. If Joe finishes the presentation
Okay.
first.
I would say that I'm pretty much there. There's the this is what I want to show you, the tax impacts, and as I said, the amount that's per month. A lot of the towns are looking at the per month tax burden as opposed to the annual tax burden because they're looking at it as a cost of service as opposed to a tax, and that people should consider that as included in what they're paying for their services when they're comparing what they're paying now and what they might be paying later. So Jim will get into that, but I will, by the way, I'm happy to email this spreadsheet to you guys if you want to play around with it. And,
That would be wonderful.
and I'll be available because it's awfully hard messing around with other people's spreadsheets. Try that.
You've tried it. Well, since you're here and you've got it run,
Yeah.
in May, we have town meeting and town decides we need this. You know, we're behind it 100%. So, in my world, if you're saying you want to buy it, let's belly up to the bar and pay for it. So what happens if, right off the bat, every year, since they voted and they need it, they want it, that we raise and appropriate $100,000 each year until that bond, what happens to our end result is the tax rate. In other words, they're voting, they're going to raise and appropriate, they're going to volunteer to put it on their taxes,
That's fine.
$100,000 every year until we get ready for that bond and then pay that down.
Okay, so we'll say $600,000 because it's in year 6?
Sure.
We'll go from $190 for that average property owner and $16 a month to $133, so it knocks $60 off a year, and $5.
It takes 24 cents off the tax rate.
It went from what, say,
80s.
Yeah, yeah. Now keep in mind that taxes are increasing every year anyway, just by the normal operation of Proposition 2.5. So this is on top of that. Okay, this is an incremental increase to what's going on. I mean, again, it's important to understand that.
Right, we're just taking a snapshot of what we've got this year and trying to relate that to years forward. And there's,
Yeah.
like I said, there's a lot of other things that are going to happen in this community, just like any other community, over the next 20 years.
Yeah.
The variable you have here is years 3, 4, and 5. You use part of that 600,000 you're setting aside to make those payments, and you raise that additionally on top of that. So there's another variable in there as well.
Joe, I want to go back to Grant, Joe, and Jim, is this right?
Yeah.
Okay. So I noted the current allocation of Grant Hills would give an estimated 1.4 plus million to Ashfield, which is to say 3.5 and change percent of the total 40,000. That's what that represents. That's our share of the 40 million. Right. And the set aside of 18 for regional costs and 22 for town-related construction means that for Ashfield, now Ashfield has been approached by a private firm that has an alternate plan to bring the dog and pony show to 10. So if Ashfield were to go that route, and that'll be something for the voters to decide when all is said and done, although who knows, they would have a share of $22 million for that non-cooperative purpose. Am I correct?
That's my understanding, yes.
So, and the math is simple. There aren't different allocation formulae. So Ashfield would have, irrespective, it's got 775, it's got a choice to go collaboratively with the consortium, the Wire West consortium, or independently, not at all. So those numbers, my assumptions here are correct, right?
That's correct.
Okay, good. Thanks.
So let me go back to ask Joe to just do one more thing. We've estimated 4% on the bond, and the spreadsheet allows them to change that interest rate because this is 5 years away, so we don't know if it's going to say 4% or not. So if you bump that up to 5 or 6, then we can see what the impact is if we're being too optimistic about interest rates.
So what did that do? Let's see. So $10,000. So if it went from, I'm looking at the bond at the end, it's at 4%. And what is that? Oh, this is up here. We're leaving you want with or without the $600,000? Without?
Yeah, with that.
So that's $180,000. If that were to go to 5%, it adds $12,000 to that. On the note portion, I mean, you could go to double that, and it, you know, it's still fairly manageable money for the first 2 years.
So,
When
the,
the notes and bonds are issued and payment is to be made, the town will make payment to
Hey.
Wire.
the draw will go to Wire West. The interest payment will go to whoever issued the band, whatever bank or institution or individual. Yep.
Now, once you have a bond, the town will be making bond payments twice a year, 6 months apart. The first payment is interest only, the second payment is interest and principal on the year. But it's important, again, to know when those bond payments are due, because it affects your budgets, of course, which budget. They may fall in 2 different fiscal years. Well, that's probably not possible.
Okay.
So
So let me answer your question. I built a model 4 years ago when I got into this project to prove to myself that this is a viable project, that we're spending my time in this thing. And the answer I got was yes. And it was a fairly detailed model. I did a lot of research, looked at a lot of components. Over the last 4 years, MBI has hired 4 different consultants to also build financial models. And you might say, well, that sounds like an extremely waste of money to hire all these consultants to do the same thing. If you look at one example, probably the first municipal fiber network that was built was Utopia. And one of the mistakes they made was they hired one consultant, believe me, and within a year they were almost bankrupt. So NBI takes their fiduciary responsibility for the state's money, your money, very, very seriously. They want to make sure that 2 things. One, that the consultant that they're depending on is giving them good information, so they check in with 1, 2, or 3 other consultants just to make sure they're all coming up the same ballpark. It may seem conservative, but and a waste of money, but that's what they do, and I don't have a problem with that. The other thing is that they want to make sure that the money that they're giving to Wire West or to any town is going to be well spent, that it's going to be for a network that we've been meeting with Wire West every Wednesday for the last 6 months. With MBI, I'm sorry. And they have gone through everything that we have. We've pushed back on their consultants and gotten them to refine things. So they're looking over our shoulder. They've done due diligence on us to make sure that it makes sense to go forward with the proposal that we're laying on the table. What they're saying for the 22 million that's going to the towns that are not in the network is that they expect that same due diligence to occur before they will give the money. In other words, what Phil Holohan said was, we'll give you a postcard, mail it in when you've got the network up and running and you can show that it's viable. Because they don't want to give you money that's going to be wasted.
Has MBI approved Leverett's?
NBI is not up and running, or Leverett is not up and running yet. Nothing has been approved. Huh?
They're hoping to access it.
They're hoping. Everyone is hoping. Royalston is trying to do their own thing with a hybrid system with fiber and wireless. Other towns, Alfred, are looking to build their own systems. But what MBI is saying is that because we have a fiduciary responsibility to see this money is spent wisely, we want to do due diligence on whatever plan the town wants to come up with. So the numbers that we've gotten out of models indicates that at a 40% take rate, we can cover cost of goods sold, we can cover operating expenses. State law requires that we set aside 3% of our capital expenditures as depreciation reserves, which amounts to about $2 million a year. And we can cover debt service for the towns. Let me emphasize that these are model projections. When you go into this, you should assume nothing. you should assume that the town will be paying the whole thing all the way through. I can't
Including
guarantee.
the operating?
No, not the other. We'll cover the other. But assume that whatever debt you take on, you're going to pay all the way through, and hope that we have a high enough subscription rate that we can make these repayments. I can't predict 5 years out in the future what the reality is going to be. I can tell you that the modeling shows 40% subscription rates will pay debt service.
Jim,
break even.
I think it would be valuable, since there's been a lot of references back to what was presented at the financial forums, and the take rates were a little bit different.
Yes.
than what you explained to me might be worthwhile.
Yeah. The number that we have to put in depreciation reserve is 3% by law. And that is under the control of the commissioner of BTC-BPU. I have talked to the commissioner. The argument that I've made is that the money that we spend for make-ready work will not have to be spent again if we have to replace the fiber poles. The make-ready work constitutes about 35+% of the total cost of the project. So the original model had 3% of the total cost, which amounted to about $3.5 million a year we had to set aside depreciation reserve. The numbers that you gave, that were given in the presentation for the graphs, were based on that $3.5 million being set aside for reserves before we could get to the debt repayment. The commissioner agrees that make-ready work can be taken out of that, which significantly reduces the amount I have to put in reserves, which then lowers the threshold for breaking subscriptions significantly. And it gives us another $1.5 million a year that can go toward debt service rather than in reserves. So that's the difference, significant difference between the numbers you saw in the presentation and what I'm telling you now.
One question, if you look at towns moving in different directions, some are enthusiastic about cooperative, which is a municipal light plant, cooperative by law. Other towns, for different reasons, are interested in doing it themselves. In the case of Lebanon, when all is said and done, they will own the asset.
Yes.
In the case of the cooperative, who will own the asset? After all, the town has invested. Who will own the asset?
Currently, we are in the process of developing what we're calling New Wire West. It is
As opposed to old Wire West?
As opposed to Old Wire West. It seems to make sense to me and everybody else that those towns that put money in should be the only ones making decisions. We've got 6 towns in Wire West that are partially cable towns. We've got a couple towns that want to do it on their own. Well, they shouldn't have any influence in making the decisions about how the operation is run. Just the towns that put money into the network should make those decisions. So we're going to be forming New Wire West, or a new co-op, that will have only members that put money in as members. They will make all of those decisions as to how the money is to be allocated.
They put money in, you mean approve a bond?
They approve a bond, okay? So those decisions will be made by the board. There'll be recommendations from the executive committee, but the decisions will be made by the board as to what the rates are going to be, what the allocations are going to be, how much is going to be returned each year. All those decisions will be made by the board.
You referenced the town many times, where the town in the New Wire West would have control, would have a stake, would have a role, would have a voice.
Right.
How would the town have a voice? Through its elected representative?
Correct.
And it may be that, I think that it's still open about what kind of proportional vote
Exactly.
these towns would have as well. And it could be based on how much money they put into this project.
There could be different kinds of decisions too. You could say these kinds of decisions are simple, so one town, one vote. These kinds of decisions are proportional based on the amount of money put into the network. The point is that the writing of those bylaws and those decisions will be made by the members themselves. It will not be forced on them. And that'll be a negotiation process. The bottom line is that New Wired West will own and will operate the net. And the towns, as members, have that partial ownership.
So there are envisaged a new set of bylaws, perhaps some kind of governance
Yes.
document that kind of describes how this decision-making will take place?
Yes.
Is that something that would be readiness for presenting to the towns?
Our intent is to have that ready prior to town meeting so that everybody can look at it, give us feedback on it. It's currently a work in process. Right now, we are in the process of writing an MOU to establish a formal agreement between Wire West and NBI. And as part of that, there's some language in there that speaks to the creation of a new co-op, the transfer of assets, and how money will be managed. Once we get past that contract, which I'm hoping we made really good progress today, I'm hoping we'll have a signable document by next Wednesday. We will then probably start working on a set of bylaws and the creation of a new co-op. The governance committee of Wire West met last week on Wednesday with representatives from a half a dozen different towns that showed up and had a very fruitful discussion about what should and shouldn't be in those bylaws. Those bylaws will be crafted by the towns. We have council, both MBI council and Wire West council, that will contribute to that. Those bylaws are those completed, ready, and agreed to by the 32 towns prior to town meeting.
Who is Wire West Council?
Wire West council is on the tip of my tongue. I can't hear.
Is it Greenfield or?
No, she's out of Boston.
What's
She's
Deidre's last name?
Deidre Lawrence is her name. She's done a lot of work over the years with municipal light plants, municipal light plant cooperatives in the electric field. So she's well versed with municipal light plants.
Is FRCOG going to have a part in the bylaws so that, well, the only reason I ask that is there are a lot of towns that belong to FRCOG.
Yes.
So if there were questions, like I could see there could be questions at the select board and finance committee level relative to governance and what ifs and what, each town is going to be spending a lot of money if they don't try to get answers, unless they had some sort of common representation, like FRCOG council or something like that, to answer those questions, because one town's going to be like the next town. When you get to that level, they're going to have just about 80%, 90% the same questions.
Yeah.
So it seems to me like you want to comment.
Yeah, and I suppose that applies not only to the FRCOG council, but to all towns across all 34 counties.
I think it's useful, I think, to draw a comparison with small towns that are involved in many activities regionally, and most of the 30-some-odd towns are involved in one or more regional school districts. Comparing and cooperating to a regional school district, I think, is instructive and useful simply because both are authorized by general law. Both are bodies corporate, both are bodies politic. The distinctions or differences, though, are significant in as much as with regional school, voters were asked to approve bonds, not that they issued, but that the school district issued. There were clear intermunicipal understandings and agreements as to who would be paying capital cost portion of shares. Here, we've never seen the numbers. We're going on trust, although it's asking and operating costs, should they be a part of the pie in the puzzle in the case of a regional school, there's intermunicipal agreement and clear definition of the rights and responsibilities of the member towns and the rights and responsibilities of the co-op or the region.
Right.
And the absence of that today is a little disquieting and is giving us pause, and I'll say it's giving me a great deal of pause. So what you're speaking of in terms of a new set of bylaws, if it were something equivalent to, say, a regional school district agreement, that's going to, see, the way it's set up right now, in a regional school, we the people, we the voters, we the town meeting, we the town have a say in a role defined by statute and by local agreement. Here, we have David Paul, we love him dearly, but we have a mere representative
Right.
who represents our interests. Effectively, I trust with whether he's able to persuade, but that gap is the troubling gap where the people will have no say.
That's true. We will not bring our budget before town meeting for approval.
And given, as you pointed out, that this is likely to be the town's largest investment in its history, the first ever bond that was issued, these are things we think about.
Yes. Yeah, and that's the reason that we recognize that we have to form this new co-op, that we need to have contractual understandings between new co-op and towns as to what roles and responsibilities are.
One realm, I know, I'm keeping in mind your minutes, and I'm trying to watch, although they're a little slow, like our committee minutes come along a little slow, they don't get done quickly. But I noticed one thing that was interesting, and that is the possibility of repayment. That would be obviously right now what it's set up with the decision of the board of directors. And I think if I understood the little blurb in the minutes, that maybe that needs to be contractualized a little bit better.
Sure.
In the new board, the new Wire West.
Right, right. No, that should.
Those are the things I think we're going to be looking for.
Oh, I agree.
Is
Agree.
that
And I think
meat
every-
round up home.
Yeah, and I think every town should look for those things. And I agree. And what I keep saying to everybody is that I count debt service as an expense. And when I say that, hopefully we'll generate profit above debt service. So, I recognize that should be formalized in a document. I agree with that. And we will work toward doing that, putting that in.
You and I talked about this.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm amazed by, and I know there's been a tremendous amount of work to get to this point, and over the last 3-4 years, whatever it is. But now that things are moving, there are a tremendous number of balls in the air.
Yes.
And all of us are trying to catch up, and it seems like if it continues at this pace, a lot of things will have to be finalized.
Very good.
And, David talks about the regional school agreements and that sort of thing, and there really aren't all that many towns compared to what we're talking about that have issues and continually revisit those, so I don't know how many times this will have to be revisited, but
Hopefully.
not too many times over the next 30 years, I hope. I got one question or scenario that I'm sure there was a lot of discussion in Wire West on why to do it this way, but it was noted that 20% of the construction cost is to run the wire from the street up somebody's driveway and hook it onto their house with the electronics. So I'm just saying there's 750 residences in Ashfield. I don't think I'm too far off one way or the other. Well, that's nearly $1,000 a residence. And if we're thinking only, if on a really good day, maybe on our average wish day, that 40% of them are going to sign up, why are we paying the extra $300,000 to hitch up people that aren't going to sign up? And if they can't pay the $1,000 a residence to get hooked up, how would they ever pay the monthly bill, and who would be responsible for that if they couldn't?
Let me back up. Good question. Let me back up. The number that we're giving for the May town vote, we're giving it to you as a not to exceed number. What we've done with this estimating of the cost is to be very conservative. The consultant was hired to estimate the cost for the following basis. 100% of the households were connected. That this was the only town being built. Therefore, there were no economies of scale. Okay? We know that 100% of the houses will not take service. So we know we got a buffer there. We're not gonna spend the money to connect a house that doesn't want service. We're gonna go buy the house, but we're not gonna do the drop until they call up and say, I want the service. So if we get a 50% connection or a subscription rate, half of that 21% won't be spent. So there's a buffer there.
Okay.
If this is the only town being built, which is the way it was done, you want at least 2 paths into town from the MBI network. So if one goes down, you're not dead. Well, there's a cost to run, you got the MBI here, so that connection's pretty free. But now I've got to run fiber all the way down to the next town that's got a connection that's not on the same leg as this one. That's got a cost. If the next town over is also a member of Wire West, then I've already got fiber going there. Right? So I've got a buffer there. I know that if I buy electronics at retail, it's one price. If I buy 20,000 of them, I get a 40 to 50% discount. There's another buffer. So we've tried to construct this thing so that what we're asking you for is a not to exceed number. So like, I know that I can't come back in 2 years and say, oh, by the way, I need a couple 100,000 more. That ain't gonna happen. So we've tried to be extremely conservative. We're asking you to authorize a debt so that we have, as we spend money over that period of time, we're never going to spend. We're only going to spend money as we need to with the economies of scale, connecting just those premises that want to be connected. And when we deliver it to you, it will be less than what you've authorized. The other thing is that it's a 4-year construction plan. We anticipate that the first year will be mainly engineering and pole surveys. We have to have our engineer, Verizon's engineer, Omeco's engineer, National Grid's engineer go out and look at every single pole. They then have to say this pole is substandard, needs to be replaced. This pole is okay, but Verizon's got to move its wires down, or the power company's got to move their wires up. They negotiate and they agree on which poles need work. Then we submit applications to the power companies to do the make-ready work, to actually make the poles ready for our wires to go on. That process takes a year plus. We have absolutely no control of it and have to pay for it up front. After that, we will then start running fiber connecting towns. At the end of year 2, we'll start bringing up towns live. During years 2, 3, 4, years 3 and 4, we'll bring up towns. Those towns will start generating revenue. Whatever revenue they generate in excess of our operating expenses, excluding debt service, because the towns are going to be paying debt service during those first 5 years, 4 years during construction. So any revenue that we generate in excess of our current operating expenses will go into the capital fund. So that will help reduce the total amount of borrowing that all towns have to do.
For the Wire West portion, for the operating.
No, once we've paid operating, if there's any excess revenue during those 2 years while we're bringing towns up, that revenue will go toward the capital fund to reduce the total amount that we have to borrow. Okay? So we're trying to give you a number that is a not to exceed number, and we've been extremely conservative with our estimates so that it will come in less than.
So my question is, I mean, you helped me a lot on that connection, because that's like $742,000 is 20% of what our construction cost is.
Mm-hmm.
When people call, when I call and say, hook me up, what's my cost? Is the homeowner
Yep.
paying a cost for that $1,000 worth of work to get set up?
Well, what I currently have in the financial model is a $100 connection fee. That does not pay for running the drop. That pays for the technicians to do the setup of the customer back at the home site. We put in the budget the money to do the connection. So that's, you're borrowing that money to pay for that. The homeowner is going to, current policy is that if the length of the driveway or length of the drop, because sometimes the wire doesn't go down the driveway, it goes through the trees, is greater than 300 feet, then that additional cost will be on the homeowner. That may be onerous for some people. So what I'm looking at is to use some of that differential between what it's going to actually cost to build this project and the amount you've authorized to essentially establish a line of credit so that homeowners with exceedingly long driveways, we can finance that and then charge them an extra $10, $20, $30 a month so that it makes it affordable for them to do that extent of that long driveway and still become a customer. But those driveways, I can't tell you how much it's going to cost for any given driveway. If, you know, in my case, I've got a 450-foot driveway, but when I built the house, I put in 2 conduits. One of them is empty. To get to my 450 feet, the cost was 0. Just pull the mouse through and pull it through. If it's direct buried, we'll probably have to go in and bury conduit all the way to the house. That'll be expensive. If it's poles to the house, typically those poles are owned by the power company, not by the landowner, which means that I have to pay make-ready costs on those poles. The estimate that we have in the model, based on the estimates that the cost that NBI had for building the middle mile, for make-ready is $450 a pole to pay for the engineers and work and everything else. So, depending on the number of poles there are and how much make-ready work is required, will determine how much that cost is going to be. So I can't give you a definite number as to what it is. For houses along Main Street, it's just a straight drop off the wire to the house.
When, and that's my situation. But just thinking of it as an average of $1,000. I urge you to be thinking about why we're only doing it for $500. Especially when the town is being asked to borrow all this money to do that work. Or $100, I'm sorry, you said $100. We're borrowing that money to get somebody hooked up. The whole town is paying for it when only maybe half the town may feel that it's a benefit to them to take advantage of it. Plus, I have to believe that every property that the fiber optic goes by, the value of that property gets increased by several $1,000s.
Yes.
So for those people not to pay their cost of getting hooked up, I mean, if I build a new house, it costs me money to get electricity to it, right? I have to pay all of that. And let's say we had 350 households, and we charged them, it was $1,000. That would be 300, if that came directly to the town, if that charge could come to the town, that would be another $350,000 that we could use to reduce our debt.
What you have,
And I got an idea that there's too much of a good thing if we're not charging people. If people want something, they need to buy it, one way or another. But you're following my idea, and I really urge you to think about it, because that would make a huge difference for not only Ashfield, but for every community, and it would be a lot more even way to cover the costs and the debt service and the whole deal. I just don't think every property owner needs to, the fiber optic is good for the community and all of that, but I don't think that our local taxpayers need to be paying for everyone's individual hookup, or to be subsidizing it at such a tremendous level. So that's just something I want you to think about, and to think about what's truly fair. I kind of think that the idea of it is that we'll get more people to sign up if we run it into their house and kind of shove it down their throat. But at the same point, I think a tremendous number of those people don't have the means to pay the $120 a month or whatever the cost is going to be for the service. And where does that get you but in trouble? So I just urge you to think about that and maybe take that back to the board of directors.
Yep, we have thought about that quite a bit. It's a balancing act, as you know, from retail sales or wholesale sales. You've got price and demand, right? And as you increase price, the demand decreases. So the question is, does it make sense to charge everybody $1,000 connection fee and have half the customers or a third of the customers? Or does the curve change significantly so that we generate significantly more revenue? If we charge them $100, is the revenue side of that make up for that loss in cost that they're paying up front over time? And those numbers we've been struggling with. We came to the $100 because we could see that there was price sensitivity in getting hooked up. And if that means that we generate a whole lot more revenue, that makes it easier for us to make those repayments to the towns, then I'm in favor of a lower connection fee. You're right in that, and there's an argument last Wednesday at the legal meeting about the question of charging people with greater than 300-foot driveways, or should that be part of the construction cost too? The argument can be made that the numbers that we're giving you includes an average driveway length for the town, so we figured that into the total cost. And in that case, you have people with short driveways subsidizing people with long driveways. Is that fair? I don't know.
Well, there's always an argument. There's always an argument, that things are fair, but how can we make them more fair?
Right.
Right? And what I'm looking at is this huge subsidy
Yep.
to get people hooked up that may not even want to be hooked up.
Only those that want to be hooked up will spend the money on it.
Or really feel the need. Yeah, but they're only going to spend $100.
Right.
I mean, you give me, I may have no desire for it at all, but you're saying, well, it would cost $1,000, but for $100 you can have it all set up there. It would be kind of hard even for a Yankee like me to turn that down.
Right.
All right? But I can already hear, someone that's got a property worth $150 or assessed at $150,000 working through this and saying, all right, but a person or persons that have $600,000 worth of property that are paying hugely through their tax rate on this, for this debt service, to subsidize this property when they may only have one house and one hookup. That's why you can always make it a little more fair, depending on whose ox is being gored, I suppose.
Right. There's some other advantages. There's some other advantages in terms of ubiquitous connections. That is, having everybody able to afford it. If you look at your school system, for instance, if all of the students in the school system have the capability to connect to the internet at home, what has happened around the country in several school systems that have ubiquitous connections is that school systems have that flexibility of going straight to e-books, no printed material, saves them quite a bit of money, that some of them have gone to 3 days in school, 2 days at home via the internet. It pulls in a lot of the homeschool people back into the school system. There's in our case at Wacona, Cummington, we just got our elementary school shut down because we had 10 kids in the first grade, 5 kids in the second grade, 10 in the third, 10 in the fourth, 10 in the fifth. You can't afford that. That doesn't make sense. You need more kids. Well, in the high school, only 2 kids registered for French. We can't afford to put a teacher in for French. So French isn't offered. But if you have ubiquitous internet available, then we can have one French teacher service multiple schools and increase the value of the education. So The internet has the ability, if it's ubiquitous, of not decreasing the school budget, but decreasing the rate of growth of the school budget, and every taxpayer will benefit from that. If you have ubiquitous internet, people that need to go to their doctor can use video conferencing with the doctor, especially diabetics that have to have things monitored. There's a lot of benefits that all individuals in the town can have from that. So you really need to look at it as public infrastructure. It's a road.
Well, I'm just bringing it up because
No,
I
you're-
want it, I'd like it to at least be seriously discussed. And the reason I want to make sure that it's brought up is that I'm trying to find a way to make this pass.
I agree.
And by finding a revenue source, besides 100% taxpayer support to pay this debt in the town of Ashfield
Yeah.
would be huge.
Let me give you another reason to make it pass.
You got cash?
No, I'm always looking for that. These are, you'll be receiving these in the mail next week. These are galley proofs, they've got mistakes in them, so I want them back.
You don't want them floating
I
around.
don't want these floating around, these copies floating around. And I've got one here that I'll pass around this group. What we're going to be offering is 25 megabits symmetrical for $49 a month. Full feature telephone for $25 a month. So high-speed internet and phone for $74 a month. I don't know what you're currently paying, but I'm going to guess that it's more than $74 a month for those two services. Add on the additional tax burden of $15 a month at no profit, you're still paying less than what you're currently paying for phone and TV, or phone and internet. So just on that basis, I don't see why anybody wouldn't sign up. They're saving money on a monthly basis. So as a policy point of view, if this is out here, and it's ubiquitous, and we don't overburden people with connection fees, that my prediction is that we're going to get a whole lot more than 40% because they look at these prices, they look at their current bills, and say, I'm saving money. Why wouldn't I sign up?
I'd like to jump in here if I can, just real quick. About a year ago, I went to a Franklin County Select Board meeting, and Leverett was presenting there, and they had this exact discussion. But they said, if you deliver it to the curb, you've got the middle mile, you've got the last mile, and you've got the last 250 feet, you're never going to get there. You're never going to get there, because now you're flat. You got all these people dealing with contractors. You're going to have something like solarized mass to get consistency. Whose problem is it delivering that last 250 or 300 feet? So hearing Leverett, rather than Wire West, make the argument why they delivered it helped me a lot. And I know that they're coming to a FRCOG presentation coming up here in our Select Board Essential Things, and that's a perfect question to ask them if you're still concerned about that. And they looked at it as infrastructure for the town, improving the town too. So I just wanted to jump in. It's kind of an independent source from Wire West, right?
So
Tom, did you have anything? You've been very quiet.
It's a lot to absorb, but, I think the fact that it's going to raise everyone's home value has value in it. So even that person that the fiber's going past their house and they're not hooking it up, just the fact that we're increasing the value of their property, they should pay something for that.
The other thing is that if you talk to realtors, the first thing that potential home buyers ask, is there high-speed internet at this property? If the answer is no, the answer is, I don't want to look at it. I don't care what the price is, I don't care what property it is, I want to look at it. And with DSL right now, if you try to sell your house, the new buyer doesn't get the DSL. It goes away.
What about the satellite dish bolted to the back of my house? That could stay.
That can say, if you want to keep paying $120 a month for it, and only hit 1.5.
Yeah.
David?
Two things. One is I think about the issue of distributing the burden to the subscribers is concerned. Simply as if we can increase the number of subscribers to a much larger number, then the likelihood that this is sustainable over the long term is much higher. To me, it's as simple as that. The second comment I just wanted to make goes way back 15 minutes or something when you were talking about there's a lot of balls in the air. What I think of is that there's a lot of issues that are not fully resolved yet. I don't know if this is the right time to bring this up or not, but we as a town do not have to take this up in May at our annual town meeting if we feel that we need more time to make sure that the governance issues and so on are ironed out. We could have a special town meeting in the summer, for example. So one of the issues is that, there's this concern that we're being rushed to make this decision without the adequate information. And I think we certainly have the opportunity as a town to make the decision that if we don't have enough information yet, the select board can postpone that article for a later time.
Yeah, I like that thought, David, because, this article on the annual town meeting warrant is going to be a 4-hour discussion on top of the 3-hour discussion about the $3,000 for the library and whatever. So having this as its own meeting.
Extra $72 for the animal control officer.
Yeah, that could drag out for a while. So having this as its own meeting makes a lot of sense, especially if issues that the balls in the air, fully understanding the governance issues that we're talking about, trying to have that all hammered out and well understood by the townspeople by the time we go to meeting. I'd be amazed if we made it by May. I really would.
And what's interesting is that I've discovered that the culture in different towns within Wire West varies dramatically. So there are some towns that feel, that are not asking these kinds of questions, that we are not expecting as much, for example.
Yeah.
There are other towns who feel...
You're saying they're not as cultured as we are.
I didn't say anything. I'm not sure it has anything to do with culture. And in addition, there are other towns who feel like it's completely inappropriate to have this sort of authorization done except an annual town meeting, for example. But we have a different sort of culture where this sort of thing would be reasonable with sufficient transparency and notification and so on. So other towns, I think, are feeling much more rushed to get this done. But I would encourage us to take our time and make sure that we get enough information before we make a good decision.
Just, Joe, we need to vote to move forward, and we also need a ballot question, right? We need.
If you vote at the annual town meeting and have a debt exclusion tied to it, the debt exclusion vote has to be by September 30th.
Okay. See, our town meeting and election are the same day.
Well, it would have to be a special election.
It would have to be a special.
Yeah.
If it wasn't on.
If it wasn't.
If it wasn't annual town meeting day.
Well, I think to the point, it's tough enough to get people to understand something at a town meeting. If you want to put them in a voting booth, we all know, both at town meeting and in voting, if people have any question at all, if they think it's confusing, if they don't understand words, if they think they're going to vote no. We all know that who've ever dealt with towns and town meetings. So, I think what you have to measure is, are you better off going in with a strong suit, or are we willing to lose one before we win one?
What amazed me is, I think it was 3 tries
Yeah,
to build to build a new highway garage.
Yeah.
And on Florida town meeting, they got 2/3. But it took 3 tries to get 50% on a paper ballot.
When in my prior job, I was with Division of Local Services, and I probably worked with finance committees, selectmen, and in 150 or 200 cities and towns in the state, and they all face the same thing, and they all
always talked about, sometimes it takes more than once, you know, and for these big projects, it does. It takes that long sometimes for the message to penetrate. I'd like to be, one more comment, I'd like to know what this lady has on her mind.
She was the next on my list.
I have two questions.
Oh, I'm sorry, I went back to you.
That's okay. Given that fiber miles is one of the two factors,
Yes.
I think you answered my question, but when I started, I didn't know. And that was how much distance were you putting in from road to house into that fiber mile calculation?
The fiber mile calculation does not include the distance from the road to the house.
Okay. And number two is just for clarification. I live on Main Street. I'm more than 300 feet. I have 3 poles, and the last pole you go underground.
Okay.
So what's it going to cost me, besides the $100 if that's confirmed, to connect?
The
Around
conduit,
$12,800.
he wants you to pay a lot.
I'm sticking with the 100.
He didn't buy your vote, did he?
But I'm probably not the only one in town
No, I
with that
appreciate that.
scenario, and I'm
Yeah.
thinking, oh my God, just to
If-
get that connection.
If the conduit that goes from that last pole to your house has got room in it, it's probably not going to cost a thing.
But what about those poles?
The first 2 poles will do for free.
Uh-huh.
How many poles do you have?
3.
3. The third one, I don't know. It
And,
depends on the
and all
condition of
that
the pole.
fiber to come from the street, up the hill, and
Yep.
around, through and over, and
Right, the fiber's cheap,
I gotta
it's
It'll
the
be
it's the labor that's.
subsidized by everybody else in town that gets a tax bill.
well, plus my own if I don't connect. If I
Right.
didn't connect because it was too expensive to get the connection, I'm still paying part, whatever it is, towards doing this project
For
Right.
$15 a month.
Thank you very much.
for an average house.
Cha-ching.
Okay,
It won't be that expensive.
Tommy, you've been waving your hand.
Oh, I'm sorry. So back to the first, I'm terribly sorry. For the first part, if they didn't account for fiber miles for the distance from the road to the properties, and given this is mostly rural towns, I assume, that could be a big number in terms of fiber miles.
It could be, but we don't know how many households are actually going to connect. So we just use the fiber miles on the street, not the drops.
And not even an average for the drops.
No. No, just the
I thought
fiber
you said it
miles
was-
on the street.
Jim, I thought you said you assumed 300 feet.
We're talking about 2 different things.
The drop is 300.
The apportionment formula
Yeah,
of how much of the state grant money is used
yeah,
was based on fiber miles on the street, plus households.
right.
For a town like Holly, those fiber miles are because they don't have very many houses.
Right.
For you guys, it's pretty good because you got this whole downtown, so, you know, the formula works in your favor in that regard. For the total cost of the project, we built into that estimation the average driveway length
Okay.
for all the premises.
Gotcha.
Tom Schreiber.
I have a comment, question. I guess for me, I would probably leave the price at 100, just thinking that $1,000 would be prohibitive to many people and dropping the subscription. But if you did want to get the money back out of subscribers, bumping up the monthly cost would be a way to do it. I just think too many families, it's hard to have, come up with $1,000, one drop to hook up, where if you charge them an extra 10, 20 bucks a month, they'd have no problem. The second question is, let's say someone moves into town 10 years from now, they move into a house that doesn't have a drop, and they've got a 200, whatever it is. Has all the money been allocated and spent, and hey, that $1,000 hookup is now, facing them in the face? How does that work, and where does the money come from? Does Wire West now come up and just charge them 100, and the 1,000 magically comes out of nowhere?
Nowhere is a great place. I'd like to be able to reach up and pull a couple million out. What we're saying is that customers that sign up prior to construction, or maybe even during construction. We've got crews on the road. And those crews are going down, hooking up everybody, doing the drops. That's efficient. A year later, after and so all the houses that get connected prior to year 5, when you do your bonding, that's how much we're gonna get the town for. Because that's how much we've done the draws for. After that, if a customer calls up and says, oh, by the way, I want service now, we gotta roll a truck, we gotta roll a technician, we gotta do a lot more expensive. So, that's a decision the board of directors will make, your town representatives will make, as to what that fee is going to be. My guess is there will be a significantly more than $100 charge because of the added expense of rolling the truck. But the board of directors will have to look at the economics of that as to whether it makes sense to charge them $100 or charge them $1,000. I don't have an answer for that now. That'll be by the cooperative once we get rolling.
Oh, Ted.
Just a couple of questions. This has been very helpful because you've been able to elucidate a number of the kind of the assumptions and the calculations that have gone into your model. But is there one place where we can see that model in its entirety and the assumptions you've made? Because that strikes me as quite important to us. I understand that there are a lot of variables. Although you earlier said you should make no assumptions, you clearly have to make a number of assumptions as to how you create price sensitivity, how you come up with this pricing, whether it was a function of surveys, focus groups, I don't know how you did that.
I can explain that.
But those kinds of things, explained in some kind of greater detail, you can kind of study and spend some time on, I think would help a lot of us. The second question I have relates to this brochure in particular. Is this the publicity that you would expect to sell this project to the townspeople? Because my concern is, even based on what I've heard, I've been sort of 3 shots, one in October, one in December, this evening, which has been most helpful, but I'm not sure I can convince people in town of the merits of this in its entirety. I know I've got some feelings about it. Broadband would be very welcome in this town and so on. There are a lot of questions about price sensitivity of our own residents and so on that cause us, I think, to have to make a really strong case for how this makes a lot of sense. And I don't know if there's more publicity than this particular brochure coming out. I've heard about pre-registration, whether you would have presentations or that meeting, so I don't know what the plan would be for that kind of this.
Why don't I take a stab at this one?
Okay.
There's a marketing plan of which one component of this is that there's going to be first-class mail sent to each resident hopefully with the approval of our town on town letterhead, with a letter that is to be shared with the select board, a draft one that would be included to describe what they're looking at. That includes this brochure as well as a form that's a pre-subscription form and a website address that they could also do pre-subscription. So that's the one major part of the campaign. In addition, it's on the technology committee's responsibility. Me as the Wire West rep, I've agreed that I will try to work within our town to educate and try to get to create some support for this. And so different towns are doing different things. Like in Charlemont, they already have a committee that's figuring out how to target and market this pre-subscription campaign, and they're doing things like having a poster competition where they have these posters about why fiber is great, and they're displayed up in the hardware store at Avery's and so on. So each town is doing different things. One of them is the first class mailing, and then we have to figure out what else we're going to be doing to try to educate and people about this.
We will be doing lawn signs, we'll be doing posters. The question about educating the public also is that I am trying to schedule town information meetings prior to the town meeting. As David said, some towns prefer to do something this large in a special town meeting so you can dedicate the whole meeting to it. Others prefer to take something this large of a question to annual town meeting when they know that the core people will be there. Both are valid. It just depends upon the select board and what their feeling is. But we are prepared to hold in every town an informational town meeting. Joe and I have done two sort of so far.
Yeah.
One in Leiden and one in New Ashford last night, where the public was attended to attend this session and ask questions, and we answered all the questions. We're prepared to do that for every town so that we can spend those 2, 3, 4 hours, answer all their questions, educate them on what needs to be done or why we're doing this and what the costs are, the whole thing, prior to your town meeting. So aside from David's efforts, we also want to schedule those so that we can do that. We'll do that before May. If you guys decide to delay your vote until after May, that's fine, but we'll try to get those scheduled prior to the annual so that you have that flexibility.
David, quickly?
Last shot on this, again relating to comparing the cooperative to a regional school. Now, the Tremont conference, we were given good information, clear information, and informed information. This is not without risk. This proposal is not without risk. And one of the risks laid out at that time was that the towns had to recognize that they could be responsible for a share of operating costs.
I'll let have Joe speak to that, because he's got a good
That-
back on that.
Has that changed?
Do you have an enterprise fund now?
Yes.
Okay. Think of this as an enterprise fund, that it needs to be self-sufficient. Unlike your budget, which is revenue-driven, this operation is expense-driven. You figure out what your expenditures are, and then you set rates to cover those expenditures. So it becomes a collection issue after that. But I would expect that as a business enterprise, that just as in a public enterprise, usually there's some reserves built into those rates. And those, in this case, there's a depreciation account, and but there might be other reserves too. I mean, I would do that. So if there was first of all, there shouldn't be an operating deficiency. These people are pretty smart to run these things, and they should be able to figure out what their costs are, and they set their rates accordingly to cover those costs. If there is, I would think internally, the first thing they do is they borrow internally from their own funds, and then they make sure they pay it back by the end of the fiscal year. Or if they can't, then they raise rates the following year to recapture that money. The fact of the matter is, it's the ratepayers who really have to cover the operating deficits, from my mind. So let's say that they want to come to the town. First of all, it would have to be in that agreement, the new Wire West agreement. There would have to be language in there that creates any kind of obligation. I would argue that, we don't have an interest, even though the MLPs are Wire West and so forth. Language can just make a distinction there or make a connection, depending on what you want. But if they wanted to come back to the town, money's got to be appropriated. If you wanted to get ornery about it, you could say, we're not going to appropriate it.
Do you anticipate provisions in the new Wire West bylaws whereby the cooperative would have the authority and the ability to request operating support from towns? Or is operating support now totally off the table, unlike what we were told in Charlotte?
My opinion is that the legal counsel who presented that notion was being a legal counsel. And what my experience is with legal counsel is that they tend to lay out everything that's possible. That's their job. I am in Joe's camp in terms of, this is a business. We're running a business. And we will have
So
the
you want to
ability-
avoid it, but is it still possible? possible.
Right, but we will have the ability to project income, and we'll have the ability to project expenses over the next 6-month period or 4-month period. I don't see that we're going to be in a position ever to come back to the town for operating. Worst case, we raise rates.
There's also instances where these businesses, I presume, would take out insurance on major risk exposure. You know, something to cover, that would be built into. And as I said, I would expect they would build in reserves. Why wouldn't they? You know?
So the new bylaws ought to be pretty clear.
Yes.
And one last question, and I'm all done. The thing that has been fun with me as I've attempted to research this in a number of different ways is that other regional enterprises, regional school districts included, are regional consortiums with statutory substance, foundation, comprising member towns. The difference with the cooperative is that towns are not a party to the cooperative. It is the municipal-led employments that are the members. In the Wire West bylaws, when there's reference to a member, it's not the town. The town, in one sense, as a body corporate, has no stake in the corporate, in the cooperative. Will the new bylaws give the town some contractual vestedness, control, involvement? Can they be a party to, and will they have rights and responsibilities?
And legally, I don't know whether we can do that or not.
I doubt it, David. I think that the law is set up so that the MLPs operate as members of a cooperative. But it is certainly up to the towns. If an individual town wants to create its own rules about how that MLP is governed and what kinds of oversight it requires, then Ashfield certainly has the right to do that. So if you understand what I'm saying, so
I don't think we have a right to
well,
compromise the cooperative or to control
no,
the
but
cooperative.
you would have a right to oversee the MLP in any way that the town so chooses.
Well,
Because
you
the
know,
MLP there's a manager of the MLP, which is an employee of the town, that, is appointed by the select board and so on. And so,
Well, will the rights of the town MLP be profoundly clarified and strengthened, et cetera, in the Wire West bylaws?
I would expect that, yes. And what you find is that MLP cooperatives that say to electricity, like Holyoke, those MLPs are run by an independent board of commissioners that are completely outside. They run that as a business. They have some contractual relationships with the town so that they generate excess revenue. Some of that goes back to the town, but that's purely a relationship between their MLP and their town, and not with the cooperative. I don't think under the law we can give the town any say what the cooperative does. It's the MLP that has that say. But you had a two-part question. I think we only answered the second part. I don't remember what the first part was.
We covered that.
No, tell us your.
Right. Is there a comprehensive business plan?
We are working on that. I'm expecting to have that toward the end of March. We need that.
Where would that be found? On the website or?
We will distribute it widely once we have it. We fully intend to have that done prior to town meeting, but I'm aiming for end of March as a target to have that mostly done.
We've got this far down the road without MBI having that.
Yes.
Well, thank you, gentlemen. Thanks to all of you. I mean, you can see it boils down to two big issues, or maybe three. Spending money, finding money, and governance. And that seems to be, those seems to me to be the issues before we start working on the propaganda to get it marketed, but not, I'm totally behind this idea that there's a lot of balls in the air, and it amazes me that we're this far down the road, and the clock seems to be ticking, and there's a lot of things that need to be answered. But it does seem like we're pushing away. Joe, thanks for coming. I mean, I think this is very good, the research you did, being able to get up-to-date information on free cash and stabilization, because some of the stuff we looked at before was dated.
You should go to the Department of Revenue, the DLS website. All the information that I got came from the Department, the Division of Local Services, and the information that they store comes from the town, through your recap and through your Schedule A. So it's there, and it's generally up to date. Usually more up to date in February after all the recaps are in.
Right.
And you're going to send us that spreadsheet?
I will. Ron, I'll send it to
You're
you.
welcome to send it to me, and I'll distribute it.
Yeah, since I have your recap.
And you have mine? Can you
I
send
do,
it to me?
yours, yeah, I'll send it.
And Jerry, you're going to be able to share the three-part allocation algorithm with Jim Draw plan, whatever that is?
I will, yes. Yeah. Let me give you my card.
You want these back?
Yes. Yes, I do. Yes, the jelly fruit errors in the.
All right. Thanks, Jerry.
Thank you. One back here someplace, or did it leave?
Circulated around. I
Okay.
think Joe got it.
So, apropos to our discussion, there is a draft letter that Mary is passing out for your review. And should we decide to do the pre-subscription mailing, the request is that the select board sign a letter similar to the one, and you can write your own, but something Wire West is suggesting this letter. And so I suggest that you all review the letter, and then maybe at a later meeting, maybe next week, we could talk about that letter and what sort of timeline we would like to do this. Because we could choose to do a pre-subscription campaign before everything's nailed down, because the money that people would be putting in is an escrow, and if it doesn't happen, then they get the money back. Or we could choose to delay later in order for everybody to feel as comfortable as possible about signing it and encouraging people to sign up.
Is this what other towns are doing?
Yes.
Select board,
Yes.
sort of driven?
So probably half a dozen towns have already, or more, Jim could probably answer that. Their select boards have already signed these letters, and then Wire West is then taking part of their responsibility to package it all up and send it out. But they won't be doing any of that until they get the go-ahead from us, either through a letter or some other correspondence.
Thank you for that. Can you send it digitally?
We'll,
No, we have it digitally. I have it.
Mary, let's make it.
Oh, send it to you, yeah.
Can we put this on next week's agenda? We can take this up, we'll have time to review it between now and then. Are you fellows going to be carrying on?
No, we're all.
Trying to keep track of the number of discussions that are going on all at the same time. The acoustics aren't really good for that in here. Well, since I'm getting my water thawed out at home, and since my colleagues here are a bit under the weather and need to abbreviate the meeting, we're more than willing. Since we started early, we'd like to abbreviate it on this end a bit. There are a few things on our agenda that I need to take care of. First is signing the town caucus warrant.
We will each copy.
So The town clerk needs this warrant signed to hold the town caucus. The town caucus is going to be Tuesday, March 10th at 7 p.m. To cast their votes in caucus to nominate candidates for the following officers: moderator and tree warden are one-year terms. Select board, board of assessors, finance committee, school committee, board of health. Those are all 3 year terms. There's one board of health member that's filling an unexpired term. And then constable, park commissioner, and sewer commission. Those are all 3 year terms. Planning board is a 5 year term and an unexpired term for the planning board, and a 5 year term for the library trustee. So anything anybody can do to find candidates for all these wonderful positions that, it's always such a thrill to serve, to find people for that would be great. So I don't think we need to vote on it. I think we can cast our vote by signing the warrant. Mary, you have a police officer to appoint tonight? A reserve officer?
Yeah, give me just a minute to. Get her name. One thing, while I'm looking for this, because the early voting and election dates are changing somewhat this year, we're going to need to get any ballot questions to town clerk no later than April 1st.
That gives us about 6 weeks. Did you get that?
What's that?
That as we work through the budget, if there's any ballot questions, since the voting is changing a bit, the laws and so forth, so any questions that we want on the ballot, the town clerk's going to need them by April 1st to be on that.
By the first.
So just as we kind of push through the budget, if there's something that we're working through.
We've already given that
If there-
date to the schools.
Questions over and beyond what's in the...
Well, if there was a debt exclusion question,
Oh,
or those sorts of
by
things.
April 1st.
April 1st.
Because the auto mark has to be April
Program,
but April 1st, maybe
maybe the 5th.
the 5th.
First of April. Just as we work through some of these things. That we seem to be doing a pretty good job of falling behind on already.
Yeah.
Due to the weather and scheduling and so forth.
Would post-employment benefits require a,
I don't think so.
Well, that would be probably a budget item, would it not?
Yeah.
Set aside now. But one thing that I think Tom has discovered is that I think we need not just to set it aside in the form of a OPEB, what do we call it, stabilization account or something like that, but it now needs to be perhaps relegated to some kind of an,
It has to be everybody.
Well, it has to be an account that we cannot touch.
Cannot touch thereafter.
If you can touch it, then it really isn't for that type of.
Is that a valid question?
No, I would think that would just be in the budget. And then it's a question of whether we would want to leave the money with us, or there is a Massachusetts, you could put it into a fund, they have a fund that we
And we
could put
did,
the money in.
last year, we did label it as OPEB stabilization.
Yeah, but by law, it doesn't cover it because we can tap into it still.
Yeah. So we moved into a stabilization, full stabilization.
But this, other than that, I don't anticipate anything at this point. But by April 1st, that's a pretty tough deadline now.
Well, if there's another debt exclusion or something, we'll have to get that in.
Yeah.
Seems though we should be able to wrap our arms around anything significant by then.
Right.
But if you can't touch it, you gotta put it somewhere where you can't touch it. See, I'm never sure anything's real unless I can touch it, so. You know.
Well, it's going to be put into some form of irrevocable, I guess that's the term for it, irrevocable account, that you cannot go back and claim it back. The advantage, at one point, we were being advised to put it into a stabilization account, which meant that you could at least then, by 2/3 vote, take it back out if you needed it for some emergency. But I think the rules have changed to the point that it's got to be,
You can't even.
Can't borrow against it.
you know, you can't. I don't think so. Okay. I'm sorry, so we're back now.
We need to go over and reschedule our budget meetings, and it looks to me like we need to add a couple or three.
Yeah.
And, because we've missed them due to weather and scheduling concerns.
Right.
And all those other things.
Right.
And I would hope that it would be agreeable to everyone if the two chairs get together and try to find out some new dates and put that together. Ted, you and I hopefully can set aside a few hours at some point and kind of work through that, kind of reschedule. Some of the people that historically have come in and made presentations are getting anxious, wondering, when do I get to go and have such fun?
Right.
And present these budgets. And to be honest with you, I think some of them have changed so little, I don't know if we need to take up these volunteers' time by drilling. I mean, skipping them 1 year when their budget's about the same every year, I think maybe we can sort of weed from the chaff a little bit.
Carry on.
All right?
That's fine.
So we'll carry on with the budget, but let's schedule some new dates and kind of figure out who we really need to be talking to. We can do that in the next week, I hope.
Are you ready to cover a couple of budget items now? Is that what you want to do next? Or not?
Actually, I'm trying to abbreviate the meeting so we're not covering any of it. I keep looking at David, he doesn't look all that comfortable.
I like abbreviating meetings.
This will get unanimous.
I think we did the biggest part of what I was hoping to do tonight was gather.
So you're ready to bring your meeting to a close?
Well, I've got one more piece of business that I'd like us to take care of.
Exclusive, just the select board?
Yeah, just the select.
You don't need finance committee?
No, I don't need you for this.
Well, what I'd like to do then is kind of publicly announce that we, the finance committee, would like to continue our meeting in the other room if possible for the simple task of approving last meeting's minutes. So I'm going to continue our meeting in this next room, give us a few minutes.
Is there somebody in that?
I was gonna say,
Oh, in the fire room, you can go to Lynn's office, the three of you.
Yeah.
Lynn's office, that could work.
Lynn's office?
Okay, all right. And we will thereby take up the minutes for the
Don't eat
last
all our candy.
5.
Normally I like it for everybody.
Okay. And then I'll get in touch with you, Tom, subsequently.
Thank you, Ted.
Very good.
we're just gonna meet here.
All right, so the last thing I'd like to take up tonight is a new reserve officer for the police department. Tricia Carlo, she lives in Plainfield. She graduated from the Reserve Academy on 3/23 of 06. She's a police officer with Savoy Police Department and the Plainfield Police Department. So Ashfield would almost be like coming to the big city. And she is an EMT with county ambulance service for the last 13 years. So she comes with Chief Wilder's high recommendation. So I'll make a motion that we appoint Tricia Carlo from Plainfield as a reserve police officer. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. It's unanimous. Okay. So if it's all right with you gentlemen, we'll take up the minutes. We'll put this on next week's Monday's agenda. And hopefully by then I'll get together with Ted. I'll make it my goal to get together with Ted and come up with a schedule. And we'll kind of adjust this timeline.
Good.
We may do one of those, you know, you mentioned about a doodle poll. I just participated in my first one the other day. It was kind of sent a thrill up my leg. All right.
I'll second
Motion
that.
to adjourn and it's seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All right, thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
I think it was a good night.
Very productive.
Early
Try
start,
not to get involved with
early finish.
Thanks, Tech, for really good.
Sure.
Yes, absolutely.
So we're still meeting and we're going to use this space because the other